This is the second in class 7 on the models, the 5 models. We're on model number 2, the seeker-sensitive church growth model. Let's talk about that for a little bit. The seeker-sensitive model of church growth is based upon audience analysis and is structured around the concept of modeling a local congregation around attracting a particular type of audience. The quintessential example of this model is the non-denominational community-based church founded by Bill Hybels, called Willow Creek Community Church in South Barrington, Illinois. Many non-denominational and denominational congregations have used this model for expanding their outreach to unchurched individuals who live within their target area. Willow Creek Community began using a survey to identify the perceptions of general needs of the target community in which Hybel wished to establish his new congregation. He discovered what the unchurched thought of traditional church and designed and implemented a worship experience that catered not to historical church structures, but to what would attract this unchurched audience to a new local congregation. An audience-based model for church, by definition, will be first and foremost a relationship developmental model. It sees evangelism as a process of a Christian building a relationship with a non-Christian. Conversion is a sudden event, while evangelism is a forward-moving relationship. Evangelism is successful when that relationship creates a conversion, a church member, a person growing in discipleship, and eventually the previous non-Christian reaching out to another non-Christian, and the cycle begins all over again. The goal of a seeker service church is to turn irreligious people into fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. And there's an 8-step formal process for a cycle to occur. They are as follows. Number 1, build an authentic relationship with an unchurched person. Number 2, share how God has changed you as you share elements of the gospel, and this is done over time. Number 3, invite the person to a service designed for seekers that will answer their questions. In other words, they're going to find a professional, or they're going to be given an agenda, hopefully that relates to their agenda and answers particular questions they have about faith and Jesus and God and salvation and heaven. Number 4, once a commitment is made, this individual is invited to attend a service now geared for believers. This is a different type of service. Number 5, at that point he will join a small group to grow and discover his spiritual gifts. Number 6, he will deploy his spiritual gifts for the sake of others. Number 7, the stewardship of his personal resources will be used to continue this cycle. It's a reproducing cycle. The cycle regenerates as a newly matured convert reaches out to another unchurched person. That's point 8. For this cycle to occur, environments or opportunities must be designed for that very purpose. This is the reason for the worship service, as well as other programs. They target the unchurched with a heavy use of mass media, communicative, and television-based principles that have proven to be successfully drawing crowds, and they attract attention. Second, a seeker-based model will seek to develop workable strategies for reaching that group. This implies responding to the main reason people no longer attend church as they did in the past. In other words, what worked for your parents isn't going to work for the current generation. What worked for grandparents is so far out of date it will no longer relate to this new generation. So to attract the unchurched will require keeping pace with cultural creativity, innovation, and technological advancements. The use of state-of-the-art technology and the drive to do everything at the highest level of quality possible so as to be able to compete with worldly events is essential to in fact to all of the programs in the seeker model. The boring factor must be considered if people who have some degree of interest in God are to be attracted to church. In other words, the main reason they're not going to church is it's boring. And this came out of Hybel's survey as one of the top reasons people didn't want to attend church. They felt it was boring. So this will encourage people who are seekers of God to change their agenda and consider the value of salvation if you make it not boring but interesting. Many of these are people who have been turned off of the worship of God after having a bad experience with usually a more traditional church. The church was not sensitive to their needs, it offended them, or it was irrelevant to their lifestyle. What is necessary to turn that person around is for a relationship to be built and to provide them with objective evidence of the truth claims of Christianity. And that's where you'll see a number of the books coming out of Willow Creek now are apologetic books. They're written for an unbelieving audience, but again, usually they're purchased by Christians. They will generally follow the logical path, and they'll make a profession of faith if this process is done with relational authenticity. This principle so drives this model that extensive energy has been spent to analyze the target audience to define who is unchurched, hairy, and merry. The key to church growth is to discover the mind of the unconverted and to properly apply that information to his or her needs through church structures and programs that are specifically designed to meet those needs. These two principles will connect the unchurched to Jesus Christ, causing the local church to grow. The result of this model is that both church structure, government, polity, procedure, and goals are centered around the needs of the unchurched, not God's people. Sermons as well as programs primarily focus upon identifying a cultural need and responding to it from a generally personal and biblical perspective. There is a strong atmosphere of acceptance of the unchurched at these events and a sincere desire to answer the questions they're asking rather than setting an agenda from another perspective. Now, let's talk about this model a little bit, and let's talk about some of its strengths and weaknesses. And again, like the other ones, there's many strengths, and you probably can grasp yourself from this brief explanation of the model some things that you would say are strengths and weaknesses. Let me give you some of mine. The strengths of this strategy are as follows. Number one, the focus and sensitivity to the needs of the unchurched is most attractive when it's done well. They're correct there. If needs are met, people generally will come. Number two, the importance of having a relevant and understandable message and communicating that in a winsome manner can't be overstated. How many times have you heard people left churches because the preacher is boring? He might be friendly and kind and understanding and intelligent, but when he gets up there and speaks, he puts you to sleep. Number three, building relationships has always been an element of growing churches. I think you'll find that in every one of these elements. What's interesting here is the use of the word authenticity. The deliberateness of this dynamic makes it much more effective as people see that as part of their mission. In other words, everyone who's gone through this cycle now is repeating the cycle. Now they're going back and trying to bring people into this pattern. Number four, the seeker-sensitive model does not assume the general population is educated about the basic truth claims of Christianity. How true is that? We live in a a post-Christian culture. Therefore, it stresses simple and basic doctrines and teaches them in a manner assuming the audience is unaware of the truth claims of Christianity. In a post-Christian society, this is a powerful tool for presenting the gospel in an understandable way. How many times have people come to church and they just didn't get anything out of it, or it didn't relate to them, or there's no sticky points in their brain that were attached gospel truths? The Word of God just didn't penetrate their heart. Now, here's some of the criticisms of the strategy. Number one, the power of media and technology cannot be underestimated. It is too easy to make a method of technology the message itself. Media usage is not neutral, but it carries with it its own message of what is valuable and true. How it does that is, here's a good example. It carries with it significant limitations as to what can be communicated given such a short attention span to media presentations. There's an argument now that people's attention spans have shrunk. That may be because they're only fed media presentations. You can have extended and long conversations with individuals. They have attention spans to talk for 10, 20, 30 minutes nonstop. I've had those conversations where I've sat and said nothing for 20 minutes. So the issue isn't short attention spans, it's that media can only hold attention for short periods of time. That means you can only go so deep with television programming and media-related programming. It's hard to have comprehensive or in-depth studies using media techniques. It's not impossible, it just tends to be contrary to the media form itself. Number two, entertainment dynamics draws entertainment seekers. And this is something you have to be aware of. If you're going to put on pizzazz, you're going to attract people who are interested in pizzazz, not necessarily interested in God. Now, they may become interested in God because you tagged an entertainment factor, but don't underestimate the fact that what drew them was simply entertainment. This is a proven communication rule. We know in advertising, sex sells. It's the same concept that entertainment draws crowds. That's why musically you may have somebody that's not all that talented compared to someone else, but their entertainment factor is so much more overwhelming than the talented person that they tend to draw a larger crowd. So it's not necessarily the quality of the skill or the content that's being communicated, as it is simply an entertainment factor. The seeker-sensitive model has not proven its case from a biblical perspective that people dead in their sins are seeking God or even capable of seeking God. In fact, to the contrary, someone who is dead is not a seeker by definition. This appears to downplay the power of sin, or at least it can, and it tends to underestimate the closeness of people's spirits to churches. So just because they're coming regularly, Ben Franklin went to church often, heard George Whitefield and was very impressed with his oration skills, but there's no indication that Ben Franklin was converted, even though he attended those. So we have to be careful about how we define the value of that amount of people attending. Number 3, the problem with people not joining a church is not primarily boredom, according to the Scriptures. It's rebellion, according to the Scriptures. Willow Creek Church itself did a self-study. And they found that they had been successful drawing large crowds, some of the largest crowds in the history of America, with regular church attendance. They used worldly methodologies to do that, and everyone will tell you those media dynamics work. However, they also found in their self-study that their success in maturing Christians who attend through discipleship was a failure. Number 4, the question must be asked if this model is transgenerational. We can't answer that question because most likely few of us are going to live past this, and right now we need information on what models work for us now. But the question needs to be asked, will this model last more than one generation, giving the fast pace of cultural change? In other words, will this model burn itself out, simply trying to keep up with the secular media entertainment products? A good example of that is look at movies that were produced in the 50s and 60s compared to the 90s and the 2000s as far as the intensity of graphics or the intensity of violence. Those things have escalated so much in movies in an attempt to keep our attention. Can the church compete with such intensity of entertainment dynamics? Or will it succumb to a social gospel as it strives to meet simply felt needs? In other words, it's going to drop back into that relational model and realizing that it just can't keep up with the pace of culture. This has happened in the past where evangelical organizations moved more definitively into social needs and produced a social gospel and lost their evangelical roots. This happened in the past with denominations. They have basically replaced a biblical spiritual focus with cultural foci. That's part of what's going on with this model. Number 5, the shift from a seeker-sensitive worship experience to a believer worship service in order to disciple them into, or put them into a discipleship program reeks of a bait-and-switch technique. The concept of the Church of God as a family seems to be lost in this marketing environment. In other words, what you're bringing them to is not what ultimately is going to sustain them. It's almost as though there's two types of churches. There's a church that is an introduction to church, and then there's a church that's really the church. I have a difficulty with that. I think the church is the church. And on the surface, this model appears to be nothing more than a religious organization that has become savvy to secular communication techniques. That once a person is incorporated into the community, then they're redirected to form real Christianity. But what they're being sent to is not what initially attracted them. And I wonder if down the road, again, generationally speaking, if that's going to be the downfall of this model. Because they didn't come to church in the first place to have their sins forgiven. They came because it was interesting and entertaining and creative and powerfully presented. Let's talk about the purpose-driven church now. The purpose-driven model has its roots in the Baptist traditions of the United States of America. Saddleback Church is located in southern Orange County in the city of Lake Forest, California, and it was founded by Rick Warren in 1980. It remains part of the Southern Baptist Convention. The foundation of this model is for the local church to discover its purpose. That purpose drives everything from preaching to church ministries to outreach to strategies for growth. The key is organization around a well-defined purpose. One of the keys to this strategy is a strong leader in the pastorate that remains for an extended period of time. In other words, you need a strong leader and you need one that's going to stick around for a long time. Mega churches, this is a critical element. The pastor needs to stay for an extended period of time or they will start to decline. The measure of a healthy church is not its seating capacity, we're told, but its sending ability. It will take both the dedication of the pastor, who is key to developing the vision and purpose of the church, and the skills of leadership to implement the purposes in a systematic and effective manner, so that conversion fruit is the key element of church growth. In other words, you define church by how many conversions are being experienced, and in the Baptist traditions, that would be how many baptisms are taking place. Purpose-driven church growth differs from seeker-sensitive church growth, they say, in that it places message and purpose above method and audience. Those are the two distinguishing factors, and that's why I put these two together, because in many ways they seem similar, but this is where they differ. Its principles are one of alignment to a single purpose and to keep the ministries of a church always tuned to that purpose. This is discovered by asking the critical question, why do we as a local church exist? The ability to focus on a single purpose will become the very foundation for the ultimate size of that congregation. This model exemplifies the cliche, keep the main thing the main thing. Knowing one's purpose will increase effectiveness as ineffective programs are retired, and only what is done essential to the purpose is thrust into the forefront of ministry activity. So there's shooting dead horses here, which is critical to the success of this model. After asking the question, why do we exist, the next question to ask is, how well is the business done? One such response should be an answer to this question: what can the church do that only the church can do? I love that question. What is distinctive about the church that no other organization or institution in the society is able to accomplish? It's not so much a creation of purposes, but to discover God's purpose for the local church. And here are the 5 purposes that Rick Warren says he has found that are God's purposes for the church. Number 1, the first is to love the Lord with all your heart and worship. Number 2 is to love one's neighbor through ministry. Number 3 is to make discipleship, disciples, and that begins with evangelism. Number 4 is to baptize people into the fellowship. Number 5 is to teach obedience by means of discipleship. Now note that these 5 purposes, which are broadly conceived, yet they're very clearly defined, have a definite traditional Baptistic context. And by Baptistic, I mean, Baptist and independent churches will easily identify with those as 5 key purposes. And they are expressed and defined in the church with a fervency. The strength of this model is not its creativity or uniqueness, but its ability to strongly define those functions. They're clear, they're powerful, they're to the point. Saddleback's purpose statement is, let me give that to you, to bring people to Jesus and members in his family, develop them to Christ-like maturity, and equip them for their ministry in the church and life and mission in the world in order to magnify God's name. The value of this purpose statement is that it articulates the church's existence in terms of results. People become the program or the product of the purpose-driven church. And their growth in Christ is church growth, or in other words, the product of the business. So what we're seeing here is a corporate or business model kind of being umbrellaed over biblical nomenclature, biblical language, in an attempt to make the church singularly focused on these 5 points and effective in the application of implementing those points. Once this thesis is accepted as the model, church growth becomes a matter of organizing the details of ministry around the purpose. Communicating the vision is critical and requires frequent repetition and clarity as the work of growth moves forward. The structure of the church must balance the 5 purposes so that its success does not hinge upon one person's passion, such as the pastor. Interesting that they say that, because they're saying the pastor is critical, then they're saying, well, we need to balance that. And remember what we talked about earlier about lay involvement and pastoral leadership are both important, and the key is, well, how is that balanced out? And here you're seeing the tension in this model, saying, yeah, you're going to burn your pastor out if it all depends upon him, and yet the model really does depend primarily upon him. Each aspect of a church is finely organized and structured to reach the intended purposes. Commitment is monitored using a purposeful pattern designed to stimulate depth. Spiritual growth is organized around classes to direct people into a purposeful process of spiritual effectiveness. Even the creation of a church plant has a step-by-step process that will support keeping on target until the church is finally established. If people are the product of the church, then evangelism requires a definition of its target. This was considered the second most important factor behind Saddleback's growth, second only to defining its purpose. So define its purpose, then define your audience. For a clear purpose to develop as to who to reach, information must be collected on demographics and cultural trends to create a model person. In this case, it's not Harry and Mary, it's Saddleback Sam. Again, a lot of parallels between this model and the seeker-driven model, except the context is more in an independent or Baptist structure. So Saddleback Sam is the target of evangelism. Using this second factor, barriers can be strategically removed in order to get to Saddleback Sam. Those barriers include theological, relational, emotional, lifestyle, and cultural elements. They all have to be identified and worked through in order to reach Saddleback Sam. The key is that the church will attract who it already is. This is called the homogeneity principle. We'll talk about that more when we get to church growth methodologies. The 10 most receptive groups of people that Saddleback found were this, and in order of response. Number 1, second-time visitors. Pastors don't bring in first-timers, but they keep people coming, was the idea. Number 2, close friends and relatives of new converts. Number 3, people going through a divorce. In other words, there's a major need, major difficulty, a crisis. Number 4, those in need of recovery. In other words, addictive behaviors such as alcohol, drugs, or sex. Number 5, first-time parents. Again, there's kind of, that pregnancy, as joyful as it is, also brings a lot of stress and can be a crisis in some areas. The terminally ill and their families. Again, great need. Couples with major marital problems. Again, crisis, great need. Parents with problematic children. Number 9, recently unemployed are those with major financial problems. Notice how these are all defining these individuals based upon particular needs that can be somehow resourced or supported. And number 10, new residents, especially important as an element in fast-growing communities or brand new communities that are being developed. This list reveals lots of people who are receptive to the gospel. The list moves from the most easiest to reach to those less connected to the existing church community. In other words, somebody who's come back a second time as compared to somebody who just moved into a community and has no social contacts whatsoever. They're looking for networks. The other one has come in already through a network. It also lists unbelievers who are more interested in relief from troubles than they are in discovering truth. In other words, they're not looking for the gospel. They're looking for counsel, or they're looking for how-tos. The purpose-driven model then encourages more how-to than ought-to sermons to attract these unbelievers. The purpose-driven model is complete when a member becomes a minister to those who have yet to become a member. In other words, just like in the seeker-sensitive model, you've got this reproductive cycle. Some people would base that on 2 Timothy 2:2. This means the structure of the church must be purposefully designed for growth and not for control. It must be streamlined to maximize ministry, which for the most part is more exciting than the maintaining of existing ministries. So again, you'll see in the purpose-driven, constantly new models or new ministries, new options are being thrown out there, new structures are being created. And each one of them with a focus on purpose, and that will cause growth. Let's talk about now the strengths and weaknesses of this model. This model has a strong focus on aligning the purposes of the church to only a few purposes, then, and particularly 5. Often churches their problem with growing is that they're distracted or they're disorganized when it comes to purpose. They've lost their purpose, or they have too many purposes. They're doing lots of little things with no cumulative effect. This model will appeal to churches who have good leadership but poor organizational skills. Number 2, the focus on conversion, reaching out, and missions is strongly supported in Scripture. That's a strong American and Southern Baptist tenet of their faith. In one sense, every church desiring to grow must be outward focused and effective in implementing such a focus. Number 3, this model claims to be more attractive to its message and purpose than the seeker-sensitive model. This doesn't appear to be completely true, and I'm not sure that I can agree with this, but this is their claim. The purpose-driven model is as much concerned with efficiency and process, I think, as the seeker-sensitive model. So this idea that its message and purpose are more attractive, or it gives more attention to that. Again, if you read the literature coming out of the purpose-driven model, organization, you'll find that just as much, if not more, time is spent on the efficiencies and the processes and developing quality as the seeker-sensitive model is. It also gives a lot of attention to the importance of knowing one's audience. And again, that was key to the seeker-sensitive as well. Number 4, the ability of this model to direct churches to a clear and meaningful mission statement allows them to direct their limited energies, personnel, and financial resources to reaching deliberate goals. And again, oftentimes churches are so busy doing little things that there's no cumulative effect. There's no point to the arrow. It's dull. The ministry is dull and doesn't penetrate the culture. The point being, aiming for a goal means you'll likely hit the goal, or at least you're going to move towards that goal. But without any target mission, you wouldn't even know if you reached the goal. Those are some good and some strengths, and there's more. Again, you can come up with some of your own. Some of the criticisms of this strategy are as follows. Number 1, the model is dependent upon a strong pastoral leader. That's the bottom line. Such leadership is hard to find. Most ministers are not right-brained, engineered-oriented, goal-driven individuals. If they were in smaller churches that need to grow, they wouldn't have the social skills to develop the relationships to make it happen. They would lose the balance between goals and relationships. For this reason, a number of times the application of this model fails in environments where relationships are more critical than specificity of goals. Number 2, this model appears to be a cookie-cutter model. In other words, even in church planning, the mission developer is given a step-by-step process to follow. There's a lot of people that just don't follow that type of procedure. They're not that type of people. Cookie-cutter models oftentimes fail to take into consideration critical elements in the community, or they can actually blindside you to not seeing roadblocks or barriers that will eventually stymie such a model. Number 3, this model appears to churches with an episcopal form of government, as it gives the pastor a lot of authority and requires much vision and energy on his part. And by episcopal, I don't mean the Episcopal Church or the Church of England. What I'm referring to is kind of the hierarchical form of government seen in the Roman Catholic Church and in Baptist churches and in independent churches, where basically the pastor calls all the shots. He runs the show. He's involved in everything. Again, one of the dangers here is the burnout of that pastor. He may have some leadership skills. He may be able to draw 50, 80, 100, maybe 200, 250 people. At that point, he will just exhaust himself. Baptist and independent congregations tend to gravitate toward this model more easily than would Presbyterian or Reformed or more democratically run churches such as congregational churches, those structures. So this model in itself has some limitations just with American traditions and religion. Number 4, an inordinate amount of time is spent describing effective organizational skills. Obviously in the context of spiritual language, it's trying to be biblical in that sense. But really the key to growth is not so much the biblical language or the content as it is effective organizational skills. This is corporate America invading the church. This tends to downplay the mystery of the spiritual dynamics of the Holy Spirit. Honestly, when all is said and done, we don't know why one church grows and another one does not. There may be sociological factors, there may be administrative factors, there may be spiritual factors that can be identified, but the mystery still remains as to exactly, well, why did that one turn around and another one, literally a block away in the same community, did not turn around? It's hard to pin that down. There is a spiritual mystery that takes place because really the Holy Spirit is the one who causes whatever we do to be effective. Number 5, this model has a strong appeal to management types of people, and I've kind of made reference to that earlier. Brains that lean toward procedures, such as personality types that are more engineer-modeled or minded, will gravitate to this. On the other hand, creative-minded people won't. Leaders who thrive in the context that proves lots of freedom, creativity, experimentation, wanting to work outside the box, they're going to find this model stifling. They don't want a step-by-step procedure. They want to know the broad general principles, and then they want to apply them in the way in which their personality dictates. Sometimes you'll see that stifling or that stiffness in the application in the use of music, drama, or other creative left-brain activities within the church. Our next talk, we're going to go into the church growth model, and then we'll talk about the missional model.